The crystal chandeliers sparkled above like 1,000 tiny stars as Elena moved through the crowded ballroom with a silver tray balanced perfectly on her left hand. She had done this so many times that she could navigate the sea of expensive suits and designer gowns with her eyes closed. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Another Friday night at the Plaza Hotel, another charity gala for people who had more money than they knew what to do with. Elena smiled politely as a woman in a diamond necklace took a glass from her tray without even looking at her face. That was the thing about being a waitress at these events. You became invisible. Just another part of the furniture, like the velvet curtains or the ornate columns that held up the ceiling. And most days that was fine with Elena. She didn't need their attention. She just needed the paycheck. But tonight was different. Tonight, her eyes kept drifting toward the grand piano that sat in the corner of the ballroom like a sleeping giant. The Steinway gleamed under the soft lighting, its black surface so polished she could probably see her reflection in it from across the room. The piano bench sat empty. It had been empty for the past hour, and people were starting to notice. She overheard two men in expensive watches complaining about the lack of music. A woman near the dessert table wondered aloud if this was some kind of artistic statement. Elena knew better. She had seen her manager, Mr. Peterson, on the phone for the past 40 minutes, his face getting redder with each call. The pianist they had hired had gotten stuck in traffic. Or maybe it was the flu. Or a family emergency. The story kept changing, but the result was the same. No music, no ambiance. And 300 wealthy guests who expected perfection. Elena refilled her tray in the service area, her movements automatic after 5 years of doing this job. 5 years. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. She was 28 now, but there were moments when she felt ancient, worn down by the weight of bills and responsibilities and dreams that had slowly faded into the background of her life. She hadn't always been a waitress. Once upon a time, she had been someone else entirely. A girl with calloused fingers and sheet music scattered across her bedroom floor. A student at Juilliard, one of the best music schools in the world, studying piano performance on a full scholarship. She had been good. Really good. Her professors had told her she had a gift, that rare combination of technical skill and emotional depth that could move audiences to tears. But life had other plans. Her mother had gotten sick during her final year. Cancer. The kind that required treatments that insurance didn't fully cover. Elena had watched her savings disappear, then her ability to focus on her studies. She had tried to balance it all. Hospital visits in the morning, classes in the afternoon, part-time jobs at night. But something had to give, and in the end, it was her dream that broke. She had dropped out 3 months before graduation. Packed up her tiny apartment near campus, moved back home to take care of her mother and work full-time to pay the medical bills. The scholarship was gone. Her place in the program was gone. Her future as a concert pianist was gone. Just like that, as if those years of practice and dedication and sacrifice had been written in sand, washed away by a single wave. That was 3 years ago. Her mother had survived, thank God. She was in remission now, living in a small apartment in Queens that Elena helped pay for. But the debt remained. Mountains of it. And so Elena had stayed in the service industry, working her way up from diners to upscale restaurants to finally landing this job at the Plaza. The pay was decent. The tips were better, and if she kept her head down and worked hard, she could almost forget about the life she had left behind. Almost. She pushed through the double doors back into the ballroom, her professional smile firmly in place. But as she moved through the crowd, she couldn't stop looking at that piano. Her fingers twitched against the tray. She knew every key on that instrument, could feel the weight of them beneath her hands even from across the room. She knew how the pedals would respond, how the sound would fill this space with its high ceilings and excellent acoustics. Mr. Peterson appeared at her elbow, making her jump slightly. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually worried expression that had only gotten worse as the evening progressed. "Elena, can I borrow you for a moment?" His voice was strained. She followed him to a quiet corner near the kitchen entrance. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, looking more stressed than she had ever seen him. "The pianist isn't coming," he said flatly, "and the clients are getting restless. This is a $10,000 a plate event, and we promised them live music." He paused, lowering his voice. "I don't suppose you know anyone who could fill in, even for an hour? I'm desperate here. Elena's heart started to pound. This was crazy. She couldn't, could she? It had been 3 years since she had performed in front of anyone. 3 years since she had played anything more complicated than chopsticks on her mother's old keyboard. What if she had lost it? What if her fingers didn't remember? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? But then again, what did she have to lose? They already didn't see her. She was already invisible to them. And somewhere deep inside, buried under years of disappointment and compromise, that girl who had once dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations was screaming to be let out. "I can do it," she heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them. Mr. Peterson blinked at her. "What? I can play the piano. I studied at Juilliard. I can fill in until you find someone else." He stared at her as if she had just sprouted wings. "You're serious?" "Completely." For a moment she thought he would laugh or tell her this wasn't the time for jokes. But desperation does strange things to people. He looked at the crowd, then at the empty piano, then back at her. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, yes, please, just play something elegant. Background music. Nothing too dramatic." Elena nodded, her hands shaking as she set down her tray. She untied her server's apron and folded it carefully, buying herself a few precious seconds to calm her racing heart. This was happening. After 3 years of silence, she was going to play again. She walked across the ballroom floor, each step feeling like a mile. A few people glanced at her curiously, probably wondering why the waitress was heading toward the piano. She could feel Mr. Peterson watching from across the room, his fingers crossed. She could feel her own doubt trying to pull her back, but she kept walking. And when she reached the piano bench and sat down, when her fingers hovered over those familiar keys, something inside her clicked into place. This was home. This had always been home, no matter how long she had been away. Elena took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers fall to the keys. The first note rang out clear and pure, and in that moment everything else disappeared. The moment Elena's fingers touched the keys, she felt a jolt run through her entire body. It was like coming home after years of wandering in the wilderness. The smooth ivory beneath her fingertips felt right in a way that nothing else had for 3 long years. She pressed down on middle C, letting the single note ring out across the ballroom, testing the sound, feeling the instrument respond to her touch. The Steinway was magnificent, even better than the piano she had practiced on at Juilliard. The tone was rich and warm, with just enough brightness to carry through the large space. She could work with this. She could make this sing, but what should she play? Mr. Peterson had said something elegant. Background music. Nothing too dramatic. The safe choice would be some light classical pieces. Maybe a little Mozart, some Debussy, the kind of pretty forgettable music that wealthy people expected at these events. Music that would fade into the background while they continued their conversations and business deals. Elena's hands hovered over the keys. She could play it safe. She should play it safe. But something inside her rebelled against that idea. She hadn't touched a real piano in 3 years. She hadn't performed in front of anyone since the night before she dropped out of school. If she was going to do this, if she was really going to play again, then she was going to play something that mattered. She chose Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major. It was one of the first pieces she had truly fallen in love with as a teenager. Melancholy and beautiful, with a melody that seemed to float above the accompaniment like a bird riding the wind. It was technically challenging but not showy, emotional without being overwhelming. Perfect. Elena closed her eyes and began to play. The first few notes were tentative. Her fingers felt stiff, uncertain. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't remember what came next. 3 years was a long time. What if she had forgotten? What if her muscle memory had faded? What if she stumbled and embarrassed herself in front of all these people? But then something miraculous happened. Her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The notes began to flow, one after another, each phrase connecting to the next like a story being told in a language older than words. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence, finding their rhythm, their purpose. The change in the room was immediate. The constant buzz of conversation began to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, like the volume being turned down on a television. A famous actress who had been posing for photos near the entrance stopped and turned toward the piano, her professional smile fading into genuine wonder. She recognized real talent when she heard it. This wasn't just competent playing. This was art. This was someone pouring their entire life story into every phrase, every dynamic, every carefully chosen tempo. Even the other staff members had stopped working. Waiters lined up along the walls, their trays forgotten. The bartender stood motionless behind the bar. The coat check girl had come out from her station to listen. They all knew Elena. They had worked alongside her for months or years. They knew she was quiet and reliable and good at her job. But none of them had known about this hidden part of her. This gift she had kept locked away. Elena played the final section of the nocturne, her fingers flying over the keys with confidence now, all hesitation gone. The melody soared and dipped, building toward the ending. She shaped each phrase with care, pulling back here, pushing forward there, letting the music breathe and speak and live. And then, almost too soon, it was over. She played the final soft chords, letting them ring out and fade naturally into silence. She held her hands above the keys for a moment, not quite ready to break the spell. Her heart was pounding. Her fingers tingled. She felt more alive than she had in 3 years. The silence that followed lasted 3 heartbeats. Elena opened her eyes, suddenly aware of where she was. Aware that she had just played in front of 300 strangers. Aware that everyone was staring at her. The fear started to creep back in. What had she done? This was supposed to be background music. Instead, she had made herself the center of attention. Then someone started clapping. It was the man in the front row, the one who had wiped his eyes. He stood up as he applauded, his hands coming together with sharp, clear smacks that echoed through the ballroom. Then another person stood. Then another. Then the whole room erupted. The sound of 300 people applauding hit Elena like a physical force. She sat at the piano bench, stunned, as the entire ballroom rose to their feet. The ovation grew louder and louder, accompanied by cheers and whistles. People who moments ago had treated her like furniture now looked at her with tears in their eyes, with joy on their faces, with something like reverence. Mr. Peterson stood near the wall with his mouth hanging open, completely shocked. Jenny, her co-worker, was crying and clapping so hard her hands had to hurt, and Elena sat there overwhelmed, as years of invisible labor and silent dreams finally found their voice in the thunderous approval of a crowd that had finally seen her. Elena stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs, her face burning hot. The applause continued, washing over her in waves that made her feel dizzy. She had imagined this moment so many times during her years at Juilliard, standing before an audience, receiving their appreciation, feeling validated for all the hours of practice and dedication. But she had never imagined it would happen like this. Not in her waitress uniform. Not after 3 years of silence. Not when she had given up hope of ever performing again. She managed a small bow, unsure of what else to do. Her hands were trembling. Should she sit back down? Should she leave? Should she play something else? The applause began to fade, but people continued standing, many of them wiping their eyes or shaking their heads in amazement. Then the crowd started moving toward her. Not away, not back to their conversations and champagne. Toward her, like a tide coming in. A silver-haired man in an immaculate tuxedo reached her first. He had the kind of face that showed up in business magazines. Confident, successful. Used to being the most important person in any room. But right now he looked at Elena with something close to awe. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Where did you study?" "Juilliard," Elena said softly. The word felt strange in her mouth after not saying it for so long. "Of course," he nodded as if that explained everything. "Are you performing anywhere? Do you have a concert schedule? I'd love to bring my wife to hear you play a full program." Before Elena could answer, another person pushed forward. A woman dripping in pearls and designer clothes, the kind of person Elena had served dozens of times without ever being noticed. "That's Chopin," the woman said breathlessly. "I've heard it played 100 times, but never like that. Never with such feeling. You made me understand it for the first time." More people pressed in. A young couple. An elderly gentleman with a cane. A group of women who looked like they ran the social circuits of Manhattan. All of them wanted to talk to her. To tell her how the music had moved them. To ask where she was performing next. To know her story, Elena felt overwhelmed. She had spent 5 years being invisible at these events. 5 years of people looking through her as if she didn't exist. And now suddenly everyone wanted a piece of her attention. It was dizzying and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Through the crowd, she spotted Mr. Peterson. He was making his way toward her, and the expression on his face was complicated. Shocked, certainly. Maybe a little guilty, definitely confused. He had worked with her for a year and had no idea she could do this. But it was the man who appeared at Mr. Peterson's elbow who made Elena's heart skip a beat. Tall and distinguished, probably in his 60s, with gray hair swept back from a high forehead. She recognized him immediately. Maestro Vincent Chen, one of the most respected conductors in the country. He led the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra and had guest conducted with orchestras all over the world. Elena had a poster of him on her bedroom wall when she was 16, and he was walking toward her. Excuse me, Maestro Chen said politely but firmly, parting the crowd like he was used to commanding attention. He stopped in front of Elena and studied her face for a long moment. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. You have a gift, he said simply. Not a compliment. A statement of fact. Where are you performing these days? Elena felt her throat tighten. I'm not. I work here. I'm a waitress. Something flickered across his face. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. Perhaps he had seen this before. Talented musicians whose dreams got derailed by life's harsh realities. But you studied, he pressed. That level of musicianship doesn't come from nowhere. Juilliard. 3 years. I had to leave before graduating. The words came out flat, without emotion. She had told this story to herself so many times in her head that it had lost its power to hurt, or so she thought. Maestro Chen nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Not just any business card. Thick, expensive cardstock with elegant lettering. He pressed it into Elena's hand. Call my office on Monday, he said. We need to talk about your future. I don't care what circumstances interrupted your education. Talent like yours doesn't belong in a service uniform. It belongs on stage. Elena stared at the card in her hand like it might disappear if she blinked. Thank you, I will. Thank you. Another person pushed forward before Maestro Chen could say more. An elegant woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile. I'm Diana Rothstein, she said, extending her hand. I run a foundation that supports artists in need. Would you have time to speak with me this week? I'd very much like to hear your story. More business cards appeared. A concert venue manager, a recording producer, a journalist who wanted to write a profile, a philanthropist who funded music scholarships. Within minutes, Elena's hands were full of cards and contact information from people who an hour ago wouldn't have known she existed. Jenny pushed through the crowd and grabbed Elena's arm. Her face was streaked with mascara from crying. Why didn't you tell us? She demanded, laughing and crying at the same time. All this time we've been working together and you're like secretly amazing? It didn't seem relevant, Elena said weakly. Didn't seem relevant? Girl, you just made a room full of millionaires cry. That's pretty relevant. Other co-workers gathered around, all of them buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Carlos, the head bartender, kept shaking his head and repeating, No way, no way. The coat-check attendant wanted Elena to teach her piano. Even the kitchen staff had heard the applause and come out to see what happened. Mr. Peterson finally reached her, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Elena, I had no idea. If I had known you could play like that, I would have. He trailed off, seeming to realize there was no good way to finish that sentence. Would have what? Paid her more? Treated her differently? The truth was awkward for both of them. It's okay, Elena said, and meant it. I didn't tell anyone. That part of my life felt over. Well, it's not over now, he said firmly. And about tonight, you should finish the evening at the piano, not serving. If you're willing. Elena looked back at the Steinway, which sat waiting like a patient friend. Play for the rest of the night. Get paid to do what she loved instead of carrying trays? It felt like a dream. But the business cards clutched in her hand were real. The faces of the people around her looking at her with respect and admiration were real. This was actually happening. Yes, she said. I'd like that very much. The crowd gradually dispersed back to their conversations, but everything had changed. People kept glancing at the piano, waiting for more. Elena noticed phones out now, recording. A man in the front row wiped his eyes. He had come to this gala expecting boring speeches and networking opportunities. He had not expected to feel anything. But something about the way this woman played. This waitress he had probably walked past a dozen times without noticing, reached inside his chest and squeezed his heart. Someone must have filmed her first performance because several people were already sharing videos. their faces glowing in the screen light. She sat back down at the piano, feeling different than she had 15 minutes ago. Less afraid, more herself. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen not for what she did to earn money, but for who she really was. For the gift she carried inside her. Elena placed her hands on the keys again, and this time she smiled. She chose Rachmaninoff next, something with fire and passion, something that matched the joy bubbling up inside her chest. As the first powerful chords rang out, she saw Maestro Chen nod approvingly from across the room. For 3 years, Elena had believed her dream was dead, that she had made her choice and had to live with it. That real life meant giving up the things you loved for the things you needed. But tonight, with 300 people watching and listening and truly seeing her for the first time, Elena discovered something important. Dreams don't die, they just wait. And sometimes all they need is one moment of courage, one chance to prove they're still alive, one piano in a crowded ballroom and the bravery to sit down and play. Elena's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It started around midnight just after she got home from the gala, still wearing her wrinkled uniform and clutching a handful of business cards like they were lottery tickets. By morning, she had hundreds of notifications. Thousands. Her phone had become a constant stream of pings and vibrations that made her head spin. Someone at the gala had recorded her playing. Of course they had. Rich people recorded everything these days. But this video had done something Elena didn't expect. It had gone viral. Actually, truly, massively viral. The kind of viral that changes your life whether you want it to or not. She sat on her worn couch in her tiny studio apartment, scrolling through her phone with shaking hands. The video had been shared over 2 million times. Comments poured in from every corner of the world. People in Japan, Brazil, England, Norway, all of them talking about the waitress who could play like an angel. The hidden genius in a service uniform. The Cinderella story that gave them hope. "This made me cry," one comment read. "Real talent always finds a way." "I've been working 3 jobs to pay for college," and said another. "This reminded me why I'm doing it." Don't give up on your dreams. She plays like someone who has suffered and survived. You can hear it in every note. Elena set down her phone, overwhelmed. 24 hours ago, she had been invisible. Now millions of people knew her face, knew her story, or at least they knew the version of her story that the internet had created. The struggling artist, the abandoned dream, the magical moment of rediscovery. It was true, but it also felt strange to see her life reduced to a fairy tale narrative that fit neatly into a 3-minute video. Her phone rang. An actual call, not just a text or notification. The number was unfamiliar, but Elena answered anyway. Everything felt surreal now. Why not? "Hello, is this Elena Rodriguez?" A woman's voice. Professional. Friendly. "Yes, speaking." "Hi, Elena. My name is Catherine Wu. I'm a producer for Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show this week to talk about your performance and your story. Would you be interested?" Elena nearly dropped the phone. Good Morning America? The actual television show that millions of people watched while eating breakfast? Yes, I think so. This is all happening so fast. Catherine laughed warmly. "I can imagine. Listen, I know you're probably getting a lot of calls. Take some time to think about it. But we'd really love to share your story with our viewers. I'll email you the details, okay?" After she hung up, Elena just sat there staring at the wall. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, like the walls were closing in. She needed to talk to someone who would understand what this meant, what this could mean. She called her mother. "Misha, I've been trying to reach you all morning." Her mother's voice was excited, almost breathless. "Everyone is calling me. The neighbors, people from church. They saw you on the internet. My daughter, the famous pianist." "Mama, I'm not famous. It's just a video." "Just a video?" "Elena, millions of people have watched it, and they should. You were magnificent. I knew you still had it in you." "I always knew." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry I stopped playing. I'm sorry I gave up on it." "Stop that," her mother said firmly. "You didn't give up. You made a choice. You chose me. You chose family. That's nothing to apologize for. But now maybe you can choose yourself too. Maybe you can have both." After they said goodbye, Elena looked at the stack of business cards on her coffee table. Maestro Chen's card sat on top. She had promised to call his office on Monday. That was tomorrow. The thought made her nervous and excited in equal measure. But first she needed to make sense of everything that was happening. Over the next few days, Elena's life became a whirlwind. The calls didn't stop. Interview requests, performance opportunities, record labels wanting to talk about contracts, music schools offering to let her finish her degree. It was everything she had dreamed of when she was a student at Juilliard, all arriving at once, 5 years too late and somehow right on time. On Monday morning, she called Maestro Chen's office. His assistant answered and, to Elena's surprise, put her straight through to him. "Elena." His voice was warm. "I'm glad you called. I've been thinking about you. And I've seen the video, naturally. The whole world has seen the video. It's been overwhelming," Elena admitted. "I'm sure it has. That's why I want to be very direct with you. You have genuine talent. Not the kind that gets 15 minutes of internet fame and then disappears. The kind that could sustain a real career. But talent alone isn't enough. You need training, guidance, structure. I know. I'm 3 months short of a degree that I'll probably never finish. What if I told you that I've spoken with the dean at Juilliard? That we've discussed your situation? You left in good standing, Elena. You left because of circumstances beyond your control, not because you failed. There are foundations now. Scholarships specifically for students who had to interrupt their education. Diana Rothstein, who you met at the gala, runs one of them." Elena's heart started pounding. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying you could finish your degree. And after that, I want you to audition for the Metropolitan Symphony. We're always looking for talented soloists. But more than that, I think you have a story that resonates with people, not just as a novelty, but as something genuine. You've lived. You've struggled. It comes through in your playing. That's rare." Elena closed her eyes, barely able to breathe. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Say you'll meet with Diana this week. Say you'll give yourself the chance you deserve." "Yes," Elena whispered. "Yes to all of it." The meeting with Diana Rothstein happened 2 days later at a quiet cafe in Manhattan. Diana was even more elegant in person, dressed simply but expensively, with the kind of confidence that came from years of moving in powerful circles. "I started this foundation 15 years ago," Diana explained over coffee. "After I watched too many brilliant artists give up their dreams because they couldn't afford to continue. Talent shouldn't be a luxury only the wealthy can afford to pursue. So I decided to do something about it." She slid a folder across the table. Elena opened it with trembling hands. Inside were papers. Official documents. A scholarship offer that would cover not just her remaining tuition at Juilliard, but living expenses. Enough to let her focus completely on music without having to work double shifts at the hotel. "This is too much," Elena said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Diana said firmly but kindly. "Because this isn't charity, Elena, this is an investment. An investment in talent, in art, in the belief that people deserve second chances. And besides," she smiled, "you're going to pay it forward someday. When you're established and successful, you'll help the next person. That's how this works." Elena wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "Why me? There are so many artists who need help." "Because your story matters. Because millions of people saw that video and felt hope. They saw someone who didn't give up, even when life was hard. Even when it seemed impossible. And then they saw that person get a chance to shine. That means something. It inspires people, and inspiration is just as valuable as art." That evening, Elena took the subway to Queens to see her mother. She needed to tell her in person. Needed to see her face when she explained what was happening. Her mother opened the door and immediately pulled Elena into a tight hug. "I can see it in your eyes," she said. "Something good happened." They sat at the small kitchen table where Elena had done homework as a child. The same table where they had cried together when Elena had to drop out of school. The same table where they had faced every crisis and celebrated every small victory. "I'm going back to Juilliard," Elena said. "There's a scholarship. They're going to let me finish my degree." Her mother's hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. "Mija, oh mija." She had forgotten what this felt like. Not just playing, but truly performing. Connecting with the music on such a deep level that nothing else existed. No bills to worry about. No debt hanging over her head. No uniform or name tag or invisible status. Just her and the piano and the centuries-old composition flowing through her like water through a riverbed. And after that, Maestro Chen wants me to audition for the Metropolitan Symphony. He thinks I could perform with them. Really perform. Like I always dreamed. Of course he does. Her mother laughed through her tears. Because you're extraordinary. I always told you that. I was so angry, Elena confessed. For so long I was angry that I had to give up music. Angry at the bills, at the cancer, at life for being unfair. But Mama, if none of that had happened, I wouldn't have played at that gala. I wouldn't have had anything real to say through the music. The struggle made it mean something. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed Elena's hands. Everything you went through, every hard day, every sacrifice, it wasn't wasted. It was all leading you here. To this moment. Sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home. Elena nodded, finally understanding. The past 3 years hadn't been a detour from her dream. They had been part of the journey all along. The pain and the struggle had deepened her music, given it truth and weight and authenticity. She wasn't the same pianist she would have been if everything had gone smoothly. She was better, stronger, more real, and now finally she was ready to begin again. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, trying to remember how to breathe. Through the heavy curtains, she could hear the murmur of the crowd filling the historic auditorium. 1,500 seats, all of them sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. People were actually paying money to hear her play. It still didn't feel real. 5 minutes, Miss Rodriguez, a stagehand said politely, giving her an encouraging smile. Elena nodded, her hands clasped tightly together to keep them from shaking. She wore a deep blue concert gown that Diana had helped her choose. Simple but elegant. Professional. She looked like a real pianist now, not a waitress who happened to play. Though in her heart she would always be both. The struggle had made her who she was. She wouldn't erase it even if she could. The past 3 months had been a blur. Returning to Juilliard had felt like stepping back in time, except everything was different now. Her classmates treated her like a celebrity. Professors who had barely noticed her before now stopped her in the hallways to talk. The dean himself had welcomed her back personally. It was surreal and wonderful and sometimes overwhelming, but the best part was playing again. Really playing, practicing 6 hours a day, taking master classes, pushing herself technically and artistically, remembering why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about the applause or the recognition, though those things were nice. It was about the conversation between her soul and the instrument, the way she could say things through music that words could never capture. Tonight's concert was Diana's idea. A benefit for second chances, she had called it. All proceeds would go to the foundation that had given Elena her scholarship. The foundation that helped artists whose dreams had been interrupted by life's harsh realities. It felt right to give back so soon, to turn her good fortune into something that could help others. Elena peeked through the curtain at the audience. She spotted her mother in the third row, dressed in her best outfit, clutching a program like it was made of gold. Next to her sat Mr. Peterson from the Plaza Hotel, looking proud and slightly bewildered. Jenny was there too, along with half the waitstaff from the hotel. They had all taken the night off to come support her. Maestro Chen sat in the front row, his expression calm and expectant. He had been coaching her for this performance, helping her refine her interpretation, pushing her to be brave in her musical choices. "You've lived through things most young musicians haven't," he had told her. "Don't be afraid to let that show when you're playing. The audience needs to feel what you've felt." In the back of the hall, Elena could see camera crews. This concert was being filmed for a documentary about her journey. From waitress to concert pianist, from invisible to visible. It was a good story, she knew. The kind that gave people hope. But it was also real. It was her life. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned to find Diana standing there, elegant as always, her eyes warm with emotion. "How are you feeling?" Diana asked. "Terrified," Elena admitted with a shaky laugh. "What if I mess up? What if people are disappointed? What if that one performance at the gala was just a fluke and I'm actually not that good?" Diana smiled knowingly. "Every artist feels that way before they perform. It's called caring about what you do. But Elena, you need to remember something. You've already succeeded. No matter what happens tonight, you've already proven yourself. You came back from giving up. You found your way back to your dream. That's the real victory. Everything else is just icing on the cake. But all these people came to see me. They paid for tickets. They have expectations. They came because they believe in you. They came because your story touched them. They came because that video showed them something real and rare. Just give them what you gave that crowd at the gala. Play from your heart. That's all anyone can ask. Elena took a deep breath and nodded. Diana was right. She had spent so long being invisible, being afraid to take up space that even now, with everything going right, she couldn't quite believe she deserved it. But maybe that was okay. Maybe a little bit of doubt kept you humble, kept you grateful. 2 minutes, the stagehand called. Elena walked to the stage entrance, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She thought about all the paths that had led her here. The scholarship to Juilliard when she was 18. Her mother's illness. Dropping out. The years of serving champagne to people who never saw her. That one night when she decided to be brave and sit at the piano. All of it had been necessary. All of it had shaped her into the person standing here now. She heard the announcer's voice echo through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Elena Rodriguez. The applause began even before she stepped out. Elena walked onto the stage, the lights bright and warm on her face, and the sound of 1,500 people clapping washed over her like a wave. She saw faces in the crowd. Some she recognized, most she didn't. But all of them were looking at her with anticipation and kindness. They wanted her to succeed. They were on her side. She reached the piano, a magnificent Steinway that gleamed under the stage lights, and took her bow. The applause continued for a long moment before finally fading to silence. Elena sat down at the bench and adjusted her position, her hands hovering over the keys. This was it. This was the moment she had dreamed of as a teenager. The moment she thought she had lost forever. She had chosen her program carefully, pieces that meant something to her personally. The same Chopin nocturne she had played at the gala, because that was where this new chapter had begun. A Beethoven sonata that spoke of struggle and triumph, and finally a contemporary piece by a living composer that talked about finding light in darkness. Her story, told through someone else's notes. Elena placed her fingers on the keys and closed her eyes for just a second. She thought of her mother, of the hospital rooms and the bills and the fear. She thought of the 3 years she spent invisible. She thought of all the times she had wanted to give up but kept going anyway. She thought of the waitress uniform she still had hanging in her closet at home, a reminder of where she had been. And then she began to play. The Chopin flowed out like water, familiar and dear. But it sounded different than it had at the gala. Richer, more confident. The scared waitress who had played that night was gone. In her place was a woman who had reclaimed her dream and made it stronger for having lost it once. The audience sat in absolute silence, captivated. But Elena barely noticed. She was lost in the music, in the conversation between her heart and her hands. This was where she belonged. Not because someone had given her permission or because a video had gone viral, but because this was who she had always been, underneath everything else. A musician. A storyteller. Someone who could take pain and joy and longing and turn them into something beautiful. She played the Beethoven with fierce determination, attacking the difficult passages with confidence, letting the softer moments breathe with tenderness. She poured everything into it. Every emotion, every memory, every lesson learned the hard way. And then came the final piece, the contemporary work that she had discovered only recently, but that spoke to her so deeply it felt like it had been written for her. It was about transformation, about becoming, about the journey from darkness into light. As she played, Elena realized that this wasn't just the end of a performance. It was the beginning of a new life. The final notes rang out and faded into silence. For a moment, nothing. Then the entire hall exploded into applause. People jumped to their feet. She heard cheers and whistles. Saw her mother crying. Saw Jenny screaming with joy. Saw Maestro Chen nodding with approval and pride. Elena stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance. A woman near the piano stopped mid-sentence, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. A businessman who had been checking his phone looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to surprise. 2 guests who had been laughing loudly at some joke both fell silent, turning toward the sound. Elena kept playing, her eyes still closed, lost in the music. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this, how much of herself she had buried along with her dreams. Every note she played felt like a piece of her soul returning home. The sadness of the past 3 years poured out through her fingers. The exhaustion of working double shifts. The fear she had felt sitting in hospital waiting rooms. The grief of losing not just her education but her identity. But there was more than sadness in the music. There was also strength, resilience, the determination that had kept her going when everything fell apart. The love that had made her sacrifice her dreams for her mother. All of it woven into Chopin's timeless melody, transforming it from notes on a page into something raw and real and deeply human. More people stopped talking. A waiter who had been refilling wine glasses set down his bottle and turned to watch. One of Elena's co-workers, a girl named Jenny who usually chatted nonstop during events, stood completely still, her mouth slightly open. Even Mr. Peterson, who had been pacing nervously near the kitchen doors, had frozen in place. The ballroom, which moments ago had been filled with the noise of 300 people all talking at once, grew quieter and quieter until only the piano could be heard. The sound filled every corner of the space, rising up to the painted ceiling and settling over the crowd like a blanket of snow. Pure, pristine, impossible to ignore. Elena moved into the second section of the nocturne, where the melody becomes more complex, more urgent. Her right hand danced across the upper register, while her left maintained the steady pulse of the accompaniment. She leaned into the difficult passages, her body swaying slightly with the music, completely absorbed in what she was creating. For the people who had believed in her, for the struggle that had made her stronger, for the one moment of courage that had changed everything. As she took her final bow and walked off stage, Elena understood something fundamental. Dreams don't have expiration dates. They don't die just because life gets hard. They wait, they hibernate, they gather strength. And when the moment is right, when you're finally ready to claim them again, they bloom bigger and brighter than they ever could have before. She had been a waitress who played piano. Now she was a pianist who had once been a waitress. The difference was everything. And nothing, because she was still the same person, still the girl who had fallen in love with music, still the woman who had sacrificed for family, still someone who understood what it meant to struggle and survive. Only now she had a voice, and the whole world was listening.